Namaskar, viewers, and welcome to another episode of Around the World with me, Pankaj Saran. Today, we will discuss an issue which has been in the international headlines for the last many years: the protests in Iran over the wearing of the hijab. What this means for Iran, for its political system, and for the Islamic world, and for India. The hijab issue has been festering for many years. However, recently, this year, the Iranian authorities brought the hijab issue to the fore of internal politics with the increased presence of the Gasht-e-Irshad, the Guidance Patrol Police, which has the power to arrest women wearing the hijab improperly. In July this year, the government announced the marking of 12th July as the first Hijab and Chastity Day. Women protested against this order by taking off their hijab. Protests against mandatory hijab erupted once again across Iran after the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old woman, on the 16th of September. Mahsa was arrested by the Gasht-e-Irshad for wearing the hijab improperly and allegedly died due to custodial torture. Iran is a key country in West Asia. We have civilizational ties with Iran. Our contemporary relations with Iran are multidimensional and important. To discuss these and other issues, I am joined today in the studio by Atir Khan, Tripti Nath, and Asha Khosa. Our goal is to bring you analysis of global developments that is simple, independent, objective, and yet has an authentic perspective. So let's proceed with our discussion.
Ambassador Saran, India and Iran have been friends due to their shared history and political and diplomatic relations. What is the status of this relationship in the changing world today?
Thank you, Atir. I think it's an important question. I think, in my opinion, we are in a phase of revival of the relationship. If you look at the history of this relationship over the last few decades, you will notice one common feature, which is that the relationship has withstood various shocks to the system, whether they were geo-economic or geopolitical or geostrategic. But we have managed to live through these various shocks and keep the relationship going in a generally positive direction. Number one. Number two, we are both ancient civilizations, and both countries are very conscious of this fact that we are not just nations, but we are civilizational states. The other third thing, of course, we must keep in mind is that till very recently, we shared a common border with Iran. So these are things which bring us together. Apart from this, what is also important to realize and to understand is that in the past, the relationship has suffered from largely external shocks. We do not really have bilateral disputes as such with Iran, but Iran's relationships with third countries or our relationships with third countries have impacted on the relationship. And this is something which is rather interesting. So, in that scenario, we must keep our focus on building the relationship, and also we have to keep in mind that we have a large Shia population in India. How we behave with Iran, how Iran behaves with us, is also an important factor in the relationship. We do not want a situation where Iran interferes in our internal affairs. We have a certain social and political structure which is based on respect for religions and beliefs of everyone. So we do not want a situation where Iran can impose its religious framework on India. We also are very sensitive to what Iran says on issues of core interest to us, such as, for example, Kashmir or international terrorism. So these are the factors which are at play when we discuss Iran. And of course, we will discuss as we go along the other aspects of the relationship, which include its location, its geography, its energy, etc.
Ambassador Saran, I come from Kashmir, and I have seen how much influence Iran has on Kashmir. The Islam came from that country to Kashmir and in Kargil, we have a totally Shia population who are just impacted by everything that happens in Iran. Then we have cultural ties. A lot of students go to Iran for studying, particularly from J&K or maybe other Shia areas also. But now things are changing. As you yourself said, Iran is becoming a little more rigid than what it was. And things are changing. How does India react to this, and how do we renegotiate our relationship with them, because they don't seem to be interested in culture anymore. It's all Islam, burqa, hijab. They don't, of course, little bit of maybe economy, but they don't talk about culture anymore, while we have deeper cultural relations with them. How do we go about it?
Well, after the cultural and the Islamic revolution in 1979, our relations with Iran were disrupted for many years. And as you said, there were a lot of concerns in India and questions about which way the post-1979 Iran is going to go. And this impacted on the momentum of the relationship. But after a few years, our exchanges began with Iran again at the leadership level. Yeah, it is a fact that we have a large Shia population in India, and we have to be very cognizant of the fact that they are part and parcel of the Indian society. And the most important thing, I think, in my opinion, is that they are first and foremost Indian citizens. Their identity derives from their Indian citizenship and nationhood. The fact that they are Shia or not Shia is a secondary aspect. And we cannot have a situation where any country, including Iran, tries to influence their behavior towards the Indian constitution, the Indian state, etc. Of course, we have Iranian students in India. They are studying here. We have deep cultural ties. There are very prominent Shias in India who live. They have contributed to our architecture, to our poetry, to our literature. So we have all these famous cases of successful Shias who are living in India. And in fact, the entire Parsi community actually migrated from Iran into India. So we have a lot of commonalities also. As you said, there was a period when Iran was interfering or issuing statements on developments in India, whether on Kashmir or whether on any other aspects of our domestic life, which we objected to. And that, I think, position remains. So till as long as Iran understands that the relationship with India cannot become a subject of religious discussion or interference in India's internal affairs, we will be able to develop a wholesome relationship with them.
They also have a cultural center, Iranian cultural center,
Yes.
where they, interact with the Shia community of India on a regular basis. They're very, that way they're very social. They reach out to the community also.
Right.
Yes, in fact, Persian language is taught in many Indian universities. Persian language influences a lot of Indian languages. A lot of Indian scriptures and ancient books have been translated into Persian. So there is a very healthy, in fact, I was reading that even Mirza Ghalib was actually a Shia, but a liberal Shia. And so there is a lot of history which shows that cultural interactions have taken place between Iran and India. And the only thing, as I said, is these are very welcome, but they should not be allowed to cross a line which makes India uncomfortable in terms of dealing with Iran as, of course, one of the biggest Shia countries in the world.
Ambassador Saran, it's very disturbing to see reports coming from Tehran. There are about, I think, over 100 people who've been killed in police crackdown. And while the solidarity is picking up globally, and we're seeing protests around the world in Chicago, for instance, their slogans which say for the unfulfilled desire for a normal life, in solidarity with Mahsa Amini. In the middle of all this, we see Tehran police chief Hussein Rahimi saying that by law it is now our duty to remind women of their dress code. We have seen women's movements in Islamic world and they have not really been very fruitful in the past. How do you look at this scenario, and how do you think the anti-hijab movement in Iran, along with the weight that it's getting from, people are putting their weight behind it, how will it pan out?
I think this is one of the biggest challenges that the Islamic government of Iran has faced since 1979, because this is the voice of its own women who do not fear anymore of coming out onto the street. And this movement has spread across the length and breadth of the country. And it shows that something has snapped in the social contract of Iran. And I think the supreme leader and the council, the religious council, are under pressure, because there are slogans also being raised against the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei.
Yes.
And of course, he is today an old person. He's 83 years old. So there is that issue also. So some people are interpreting this movement against the compulsory wearing of the hijab as a movement that is questioning the legitimacy of the revolutionary government of Iran and the entire structure. So there is a political character to the protest. It is not just a question of the freedom of expression or the freedom of wearing what you want. And of course, the women in Iran are getting support from across the world, and this has gone viral in the social media. And Mahsa Amini has actually become the symbol of this movement. And Iran is also saying that because she's Kurdish, there is some foreign interference. So we see that conspiracy theories are also being promoted in Iran on this matter. Here I would like to say that we must use this as an opportunity to recall what happened in our own country in Karnataka in March, when the Karnataka High Court deliberated on the hijab issue. And their judgment was actually quite remarkable, because it said, after examining all the petitions and the arguments, that the wearing of the hijab is not an obligatory function of Islam. And it said that it should be left to the individual whether to wear or not to wear the hijab.
Yeah, it was very progressive.
It was progressive, and I think this reflects the Indian ethos, where we are a multi-religious society, multicultural, multilingual, and the only way in which a country like India can move forward is if we respect the basic tenets of our constitution, which say that everyone has a right to practice its religion, but nothing can be imposed by a particular religion on a section of Indian society which is contrary to what is written in the constitution.
Yeah, we are respected worldwide for our unity in diversity, to borrow a very hackneyed phrase, and also for our tolerance. No?
I think so. I think the Iranian protests have taken everyone by surprise. And we have seen, of course, protests in the past, but those are basically on grounds of economic deprivation because of unemployment and other difficulties in Iran. But the rest of the Islamic world is actually also watching this very, very closely. And it is going to have an impact on not just the internal political structure of Iran, the amount of coercion that is now going to be introduced, or the heavy-handedness of the authorities, but also on basic issues such as the extent of democracy in Iran, how Iran will fit into the mood in the rest of the Islamic world and in the rest of the West Asian region.
Very interesting. Ambassador Saran, this take that, there's more than what meets the eye. As far as these protests are concerned, they are not just confined to being Islamic or un-Islamic, so there's a political dimension and much more to it. But coming back to what you said in the beginning, if you talk about the region, Iran is upset with Pakistan, and it is also having issues with Taliban. Does this bring India and Iran closer?
On the Pakistan issue, there are several fault lines. The Shia-Sunni aspect is, of course, a major one, because Iran is one of the biggest Shia countries in the world. and they have always been opposed to the terrorism that has been practiced by some of the Sunni groups, such as the ISIS and others. So they actually have been very, very conscious of that. Iran has also been extremely upset with Pakistan over the presence of Iranian opposition terrorist groups in Pakistani soil. And in 2017, 10 Iranian border guards were shot dead by the Jaish-e-Adl, which was the Iranian terrorist group based in Pakistan. So we have a real problem of lack of enough trust between Pakistan and Iran. The Taliban is part of this picture because the Taliban have in the past been actively discriminating against the Hazara community and the population which lives across the Iran-Afghanistan border. So the Iranians have never been comfortable with the Pashtun-dominated Taliban, and that is also a source of differences between Pakistan and Afghanistan. I think Iran is also very concerned with the discrimination of Shias in Pakistan, and there have been so many sectarian deaths and a history of violence in Pakistan, and this has also proved to be a serious issue that divides Iran and Pakistan. When it comes to the regional situation, the relationship between Iran and the United States, for example, and Pakistan and the United States is also different. So how these two countries approach their relations with the United States are also different. Pakistan has traditionally been a close ally of the United States, whereas Iran has been seen as an enemy by the United States. And one of the main reasons for that, of course, is what Iran does insofar as its ties and its interactions with Israel are concerned. So that is also a major area of difference. I think also, although Iran has pronounced on various occasions about certain issues and developments in Kashmir, the fact is they have not always given their automatic support to Pakistan in its anti-Indian hysteria and campaign. And this again is something which is an area of difference between Iran and Pakistan. So these are some areas, some differences that come to mind when it comes to Iran and Pakistan. And of course, I think it's also important to understand, and Iran is understanding that more and more, that Pakistan cannot do anything to help Iran when it comes to Iran's requirements for economic growth, for technology, and for upliftment of its society. Because even if you look at energy exports from Iran, Pakistan can import only that much. So Pakistan as an economic partner of Iran is also not a very good option. And lastly, I would say that both countries are competing with each other when it comes to port infrastructure, one in Gwadar and the other in Chabahar. And they are both competing for the same geography, for the same business, for the same trade, and for the same strategic advantages. So these are some of the issues that define the Iran-Pakistan relationship.
Sir, oil has been very important for the whole world, and India had got advantage of buying oil from Iran when there was a ban on US had put a ban on buying of oil from that country. So we gained something, but then suddenly something happened and we stopped buying oil from them. I think issue was about prices and all. Later, our companies discovered oil in the Gulf of Persian Gulf. And now it seems that deal is not happening. As per the original deal, India was supposed to get 30% of the production of the oil that we had discovered. Again, I read very recently that Iran is threatening that you better wind up this deal in I think 90 days or it's off. You take your 30% stake or take the money and go away. So is it that Iran is trying to pressurize India into succumbing to its kind of rates on which it wants to get that deal, or maybe we can have a longer relationship with them as far as this energy security is concerned? What is your take?
I don't think India can be pressurized by any country. Actually, we are too big to be pressurized by any country, and least of all by Iran. The fact is, this is a two-way street. This is of benefit to Iran, and it's also of benefit to us. And Iran has to understand that when you talk about an energy contract with India or energy exports, it's of mutual benefit. And there was a time when Iran was either the largest or the second largest exporter of oil to India. But because of the US sanctions, today Iran constitutes less than 1% of India's oil imports. So it has just dropped heavily down from where it used to be. And today, Iraq has actually become the single largest exporter of oil to India. So this is a sea change in the energy dynamics between India and Iran. Of course, India needs Iran's oil. We need the gas because we are going to grow at a fast pace, and we have a commitment under the Paris Accord to do carbon net zero emissions by 2070. And we are moving towards a gas-based economy. So we need that gas. We also need the LNG. But the whole model of this energy cooperation is going to rest on what kind of prices that are determined for the gas, what is the duration of the contract period, and the other commercial terms and conditions. So this is going to be a difficult negotiation, but I would say it's also important for Iran to be able to resolve its issues with the United States and with Europe so that we can go back to normal trade with Iran, which we used to have. One of the basic problems of dealing with Iran today in terms of trade, including energy, is the whole usage of the dollar as the currency of trade. And so while there is some discussion going on reviving the rupee rial arrangement, this is a problem, and I think this Iran has to resolve first and foremost with the United States. And as a friend, we hope that it can come to a settlement on the nuclear question with the United States and with Europe as soon as possible.
Ambassador Saran, India and Iran are regional powers and have cooperated on connectivity projects for Afghanistan and Central Asia, as also the international North-South transport corridor. How is the cooperation going? Also, both countries are trying to reset the ties after the new regime came and their foreign minister visited us.
Yes, I think it was important and significant that the new president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, met Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Samarkand a few weeks ago. Right. And as you mentioned, the foreign minister was here. So we see that there is a revival of high-level contact with the new Iranian government. This is good because one of the key aspects of the India-Iran relationship, which transcends temporary setbacks, is the geographical location of Iran. You know, it has a population of about 86 million people. It is bigger than Afghanistan and Pakistan combined. So it's a big country, and it sits on the Persian Gulf. It's a very strategic location, and it is a key gateway for India when it comes to our openings to Central Asia and to Russia. And this works both ways because Central Asia can also utilize Iran for trading with India. And I think the first, one of the initial connectivity projects began in the context of Afghanistan. And back in 2012, we were able to use the Chabahar port to supply wheat to Afghanistan, and we have done this again. And a couple of years ago, the Chabahar port has now been developed into, we have reached a stage where India has taken over the operations of parts of the port. And this is a good development, although still work needs to be done. But the fact is that the usage of Chabahar has increased in the last 2-3 years. And this provides the gateway for us to Afghanistan and through Afghanistan to the whole of Central Asia. We also have road connectivity. I mean, we funded the famous Zaranj-Delaram road, which connects up with the Herat-Kandahar highway in Afghanistan. So that way you get access to that whole landmass. And then, as you mentioned, the international North-South transport corridor takes us from Mumbai through Iran and Azerbaijan to the Caspian Sea, right up to St. Petersburg and to Europe. So if we use this corridor, the travel time for trade between India and Europe gets halved compared to the route that we use by using the Suez Canal. So there are very serious benefits to be had for developing this connectivity.
Very significant advantage.
There is very significant advantage.
Ambassador Saran, Iran is a resilient country and it has withstood the US sanctions. But a common man in India would like to ask, why should India work hard on its relations with Iran when it is at loggerheads with its friends like Israel and Saudi Arabia?
The West Asia is a complicated geography. It has historical animosities and mutual suspicions within the Islamic world. Within the Gulf world, you had fissures between the Saudi axis and the Qatar axis, and then Iran was a separate identity there, and we have no choice but to deal with all the different pillars of that region. And location, as I mentioned to you, is important factor which drives our interest in Iran. Of course, India has very good relations with Israel. We have today excellent relations with Saudi Arabia and with the United Arab Emirates. These are important relationships because they bring a lot of investments into India. They give us inroads into the Gulf region. There is a vast Indian community running into millions who are working in the Gulf. So we have to deal with them. There is no doubt about that. But we also need Iran because we also have interests in Afghanistan. And to pursue those interests in Afghanistan, we must also have a viable and a practical relationship with Iran. We cannot allow only one neighbor of Afghanistan, which is Pakistan, to dominate the political geography and the economy and the strategic situation in Afghanistan. Iran is an equally important neighbor of Afghanistan. So we need to keep our lines open with Iran when we are talking about Afghanistan. I think we also need Iran to deal with the whole problem of international terrorism because this is a matter of key concern to us. And we must therefore keep our channels open with Iran. We have to jointly fight against ISIS, against Al-Qaeda, and all other terrorist organizations which impact our own internal political stability and our own internal security. These are the various reasons why India must be engaged with Iran, but subject to Iran not crossing the red lines, respecting our concerns, not interfering in our internal affairs, and respecting India's constitutional provisions about the diversity and plurality of Indian society.
Ambassador Saran, as you rightly said, we need Iran for connectivity and for reaching to, the Central Asia and other countries. Afghanistan is important. But, right now India is trying to rework its relationship with Iran, as Prime Minister met Raisi and our External Affairs Minister. He went twice to the country and met leaders there. So how do you see, let's say, given after a certain time, say after 20 years, if everything goes normally, Iran mends its relationship with US and things go fine, how do you see India and Iran business and trade developing? What are we going to get from them? And of course, we have a lot of things to sell. Apart from oil, what are other things which are important for India to get from Iran, provided everything is all right?
Yeah, Asha, that's a good question when you try to look forward and look ahead about how you are going to be, say, 10, 20 years from now. I think there the main issue is about the growth of the Indian economy. So if you are going to be doubling your GDP in the next 10 years, for example, there is no question that India needs to make sure that it has an external environment that is conducive for its developmental needs. And Iran is definitely part of India's extended neighborhood. And we therefore have to work with Iran, and we should work with Iran to utilize all these opportunities. I think I'm hopeful that over a period of time, our relationship will diversify and there will be greater trade. between India and Iran. There are many things that we can give to Iran. Say, for example, our industrial goods, engineering, textiles, agriculture, pharma. These are all things which India can supply to Iran and help its own economic growth. From the Iranian side, of course, we need the energy which Iran has. And that is something which we will continue to look at. But we need the right arrangements for settlement of trade in terms of the payment arrangements, etc. Of course, things are changing. Now, today, Iran has become a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There was this meeting at the level of the Prime Minister. But we also have to watch how Iran behaves in its relationships with China, for example, or with Pakistan. So there are possibilities, there are opportunities, but we also have to be mindful of the minefields and the possible difficulties. But on balance, I would say there is a prospect for going forward with Iran in many areas, and we only hope that Iran can mend its relations with the United States, resolve the very contentious nuclear issue, and live in peace with all its neighbors, which includes our friends such as Saudi Arabia and Israel. Viewers, we have just concluded our discussion on Iran. Iran is a major player in the West Asian region. It is part of India's neighborhood. It is a major player in the Islamic world. Today, this country is faced with a crisis relating to the wearing of the hijab among the women of Iran. This is contributing to social unrest and protests by the women there. The implications of this will be spelt out over time. Yet, we need to keep ourselves engaged with Iran because our relationship pertains to different sectors such as energy, the fight against international terrorism, the fight against Islamic radicalization, and above all, our energy relationship. Next time, we hope to bring you yet another subject of contemporary relevance. Until then, goodbye, thank you, namaskar.